There are forces that shape our world, silent currents that flow beneath the turbulent surface of daily events. We see the headlines, we witness the elections, we feel the tremors of economic booms and busts, but we are often blind to the architects of the currents themselves. We are taught that history is a chaotic sequence of accidents, of great men rising and falling, of nations clashing out of passion and pride. But what if that is not the whole story? What if some of history's most pivotal moments were not accidents at all? What if the steady, inexorable march towards a more globalized world, a world of interconnected economies, international laws, and supranational organizations, was not a natural evolution, but a meticulously crafted design? A plan set in motion decades ago by a small group of individuals who believed they, and they alone, knew what was best for humanity. Tonight, we descend into the very heart of this possibility. We journey into the world of a name that is synonymous with unimaginable wealth, unparalleled power, and, for many, a deeply unsettling conspiracy. A name that has sat at the center of global finance and politics for over a century. A name that belongs to a dynasty. The name is Rockefeller. And this is the story of its most influential son, David Rockefeller, and his alleged secret plan to build a new world order. This is Driftwood Histories. To understand the man, we must first understand the empire he inherited. The Rockefeller name was not born into power. It created it. It was forged in the fiery crucible of the Gilded Age by David's grandfather, John D. Rockefeller, Sr. A man of quiet ambition and ruthless efficiency, he took the wild, chaotic oil industry of the 19th century and wrung it into a single monolithic entity, Standard Oil. By 1880, Standard Oil controlled 90% of America's oil refineries. It was a monopoly of staggering proportions, the first great modern corporation, and it made John D. Rockefeller the world's first billionaire. This was not just wealth. It was a new form of power, an economic sovereignty that could rival that of nations. But this power came at a cost. The methods used to build this empire were brutal. Competitors were crushed. Politicians were bought. Workers were exploited. Events like the infamous Ludlow Massacre of 1914, where striking miners and their families were killed by state militia at a Rockefeller-owned mine, forever stained the family name with the blood of those who stood in their way. Yet John D. Rockefeller was a complex man. A devout Baptist, he believed his fortune was a sacred trust from God. And so began the second phase of the Rockefeller empire, the conversion of wealth into influence. Through philanthropy on an unprecedented scale, the family began to reshape American society from the inside out. They established the University of Chicago and the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research. They funded public health initiatives that eradicated diseases. They poured hundreds of millions into education, science, and the arts. On the surface, it was the work of great benefactors. But critics saw something else. They saw a systematic effort to use tax-exempt foundations to gain control over the very pillars of society: medicine, education, and social policy. By funding the institutions that produce the doctors, the scientists, and the government advisors, the family could subtly steer the national conversation and mold the minds of future generations. The Rockefeller dynasty had learned a vital lesson. Direct control is messy and invites opposition. True power lies in shaping the environment, in setting the agenda, in creating the consensus. It was into this world of limitless wealth, complex legacy, and quiet, strategic influence that David Rockefeller was born on June 12, 1915. He was the youngest of 6 children of John D. Rockefeller, Jr., the designated heir to the family's philanthropic mission. But David was different. While his brothers pursued politics, philanthropy, and conservation, David's path was always aimed at the global stage. He was not meant to simply manage the family fortune. He was groomed to project its power across the entire planet. His education was a map of the globalist vision. He studied at Harvard, then at the London School of Economics, a Fabian socialist institution that preached the virtues of managed capitalism and international governance. It was there he fell under the intellectual sway of figures like Harold Laski, a proponent of world government. He completed his education with a PhD in economics from the University of Chicago, the very institution his family had created. His dissertation was titled Unused Resources and Economic Waste, a telling window into a mind preoccupied with efficiency, management, and the large-scale organization of society. His real-world education in power came during the Second World War. He enlisted as a private and, thanks to his connections and fluency in French, was assigned to military intelligence. He served in North Africa and France, building intelligence networks and handling sensitive economic and political information. It was here, in the shadowy world of espionage and geopolitics, that he honed the skills that would define his life: discretion, networking, and an understanding of how the levers of global power truly worked, far from public view. After the war, he did not retreat into a life of quiet luxury. He joined the family business, not oil, but banking. In 1946, he began his career at the Chase National Bank, an institution with deep Rockefeller ties. It would become his fortress, his command center for the next 35 years. David Rockefeller was not a flamboyant figure. He was calm, articulate, and impeccably dressed. He spoke in measured tones and preferred to operate behind the scenes. His true genius was for connection. He built what was arguably the most powerful private network of contacts in human history. His personal Rolodex, a legendary artifact of the 20th century, was said to contain over 150,000 names, a global web of presidents, prime ministers, kings, spies, CEOs, and revolutionaries. He was the ultimate networker, the quiet spider at the center of an immense web. As he rose to become chairman and CEO of what was now the Chase Manhattan Bank, he transformed it from a powerful American bank into a truly global institution. This was not just business, it was a new form of diplomacy. Banker diplomacy. While the U.S. State Department was bound by official policy and public opinion, David Rockefeller, a private citizen, could go where governments could not. At the height of the Cold War, he opened the first American banking branch in Moscow's Red Square, right across from the Kremlin. He met personally with Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev. In 1973, years before full diplomatic normalization, he led a delegation to China, met with Premier Zhou Enlai, and secured for Chase the coveted position as the National Bank of China's first correspondent bank in the United States. He traveled relentlessly, meeting with over 200 heads of state in more than 100 countries during his lifetime. He dealt with democrats and dictators with equal ease, from Anwar Sadat of Egypt to the Shah of Iran to the military juntas of Latin America. The official explanation was that he was simply promoting the interests of his bank and American capitalism. But was that all? Why were the world's most powerful leaders, many of whom were ostensibly hostile to American capitalism, so willing to meet with this unelected banker? What did they discuss behind those closed doors? This is where the whispers begin. This is where the story turns from a biography of a powerful man into an investigation of a hidden agenda. Critics, like the late Congressman Lawrence Patton MacDonald, argued that Rockefeller deliberately shunned official government positions. She was reportedly offered the role of Secretary of the Treasury twice because a private role afforded him far greater power with none of the public accountability. From his private perch, they claimed, he could pursue his true, lifelong passion: internationalism. David Rockefeller was an avowed, unapologetic internationalist. He believed, with an almost religious fervor, that the nation-state was an outdated and dangerous concept. He saw nationalism as the root cause of war and economic protectionism as a barrier to global prosperity. The future, in his view, lay in a one-world system, a world where national boundaries would become increasingly irrelevant, superseded by an integrated global political and economic structure, managed by a cadre of enlightened experts, a technocratic elite. In a speech at a United Nations ambassadors' dinner in 1994, he laid his vision bare. "This present window of opportunity," he said, "during which a truly peaceful and interdependent world order might be built, will not be open for long. Already there are powerful forces at work that threaten to destroy all of our hopes and efforts to erect an enduring structure of global cooperation." An enduring structure of global cooperation. To his supporters, this was the noble aspiration of a visionary statesman, a call for humanity to work together to solve its common problems. But to his detractors, it was a chilling euphemism. They heard the words of a man plotting the overthrow of national sovereignty itself. They saw not a plan for cooperation, but a conspiracy for control. A plan for a new world order, governed not by the people, but by a secret cabal of bankers and intellectuals, with David Rockefeller as their chairman. The idea sounds like fiction. It sounds like a paranoid delusion. And yet, the most shocking piece of evidence comes from the man himself. In his own 2002 autobiography, Memoirs, he addressed his accusers directly with a passage so extraordinary it must be read in full. For more than a century, ideological extremists at either end of the political spectrum have seized upon well-publicized incidents to attack the Rockefeller family for the inordinate influence they claim we wield over American political and economic institutions. Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists, and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure, one world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I am proud of it. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I am proud of it. It is a confession that hangs in the air, transforming the debate entirely. He admits it. He admits to being part of a secret cabal. He admits to conspiring to build a one-world structure. The question is no longer if there was a plan, but what the true nature and intent of that plan was. Over the course of this investigation, we will dissect that plan. We will examine the powerful and secretive organizations he created and chaired, instruments designed, critics say, to serve as a shadow government. We will follow the blueprint for this new order, a strategy to centralize control over the world's economy, its political systems, and the very information we receive. And we will listen to the warnings, from both his staunchest critics and from his own unguarded words. Join us as we pull back the curtain on one of the most audacious and consequential ambitions of the modern era. The mission to fulfill a dynastic legacy and construct a global empire, not of land or armies, but of finance, ideology, and control. This is the story of David Rockefeller's secret plan. In the grand theater of history, some figures command the stage with booming voices and dramatic gestures. They are the emperors, the presidents, the revolutionaries whose faces are etched into the memory of civilization. But behind the curtain, in the quiet, dimly lit wings, stand other actors. Their names are spoken in whispers, their influence is felt rather than seen, and their role in the play is far more profound than the audience can ever truly know. Tonight, our investigation focuses on such a man born not to a throne of gold and jewels, but to a throne of capital and influence that spanned the globe. A man who, by his own admission, worked from the shadows as part of a secret cabal to forge a new world. To understand the audacious plan he is accused of masterminding, we must first understand the man himself, the dynasty that produced him, and the unique form of power he was trained, from birth, to wield. This is the story of the man behind the curtain, David Rockefeller. The story of David Rockefeller's power does not begin with him. It begins with his grandfather, John Davison Rockefeller, Sr., a name that, in the American psyche, is a synonym for wealth itself. John D. was the titan of the Gilded Age, a figure of almost mythical ambition. He was not an inventor or a prospector. He was an organizer, a systematizer. He looked upon the chaotic, brawling, nascent oil industry of post-Civil War America and saw not chaos, but an opportunity for absolute order. His order. Through his company, Standard Oil, he embarked on a campaign of economic conquest that remains unparalleled in industrial history. He used ruthless tactics that would become legendary. He secured secret, preferential shipping rates from the railroads, allowing him to undercut any competitor. He engaged in price wars, selling his kerosene at a loss in a specific market to drive a local rival into bankruptcy, only to buy up their refinery for pennies on the dollar afterward. He created a vast network of industrial espionage to anticipate his competitors' every move. By the 1880s, his conquest was complete. Standard Oil had become the Trust, a monolithic cartel that controlled an estimated 90% of the United States oil refining capacity. This was not just a business. It was a private economic state with more power than many sovereign nations. The wealth it generated was beyond comprehension, making John D. Rockefeller the world's first billionaire. But this power was raw, brutal, and highly visible. It bred resentment and fear. Muckraking journalists like Ida Tarbell exposed the company's predatory practices, and politicians were eventually forced to act. The public outcry against the octopus of Standard Oil led to the Sherman Antitrust Act and the eventual breakup of the trust by the Supreme Court in 1911. The Rockefeller dynasty learned a crucial lesson from this, a lesson that would become the core principle for the next generation. Direct, overt control creates enemies. True, lasting power must be subtle. It must be woven into the very fabric of society. It must not be held, but wielded. This task fell to John D. Rockefeller's only son, John D. Jr., a man haunted by the public's perception of his family as robber barons. He dedicated his life to a great project of reputational alchemy, transforming the Rockefeller name from a symbol of greed into a symbol of benevolence. This was achieved through the strategic deployment of philanthropy on a scale the world had never seen. Through massive, tax-exempt foundations, the Rockefeller Foundation, the General Education Board, the family began to systematically reshape the pillars of American and global society. They poured hundreds of millions of dollars into medicine, funding the research that helped eradicate diseases like hookworm and yellow fever. They bankrolled universities and colleges, shaping the minds of generations of students. They funded the social sciences, sponsoring the studies that would inform government policy for decades to come. To the public, this was an act of unparalleled charity. But for those who looked closer, it was the perfection of a new kind of influence. By funding the laboratory, you guide the direction of science. By endowing the university, you shape the curriculum and the worldview of the future elite. By sponsoring the policy study, you create the expert consensus that politicians will later cite as justification for their actions. It was a brilliant strategy of indirect control, far more effective and durable than any monopoly. The family was no longer just controlling the flow of oil. They were now influencing the flow of ideas, the very source code of civilization. This was the world David Rockefeller was born into in 1915. He was the youngest grandson of the world's richest man, the son of the world's greatest philanthropist. He grew up in a 9-story mansion in Manhattan, the largest private residence in the city, and spent summers at Kykuit, the sprawling family estate overlooking the Hudson River. His world was one where conversations with foreign dignitaries and titans of industry were commonplace. He was not raised to be a mere businessman. He was raised to be a custodian of this vast, invisible empire of influence. His education was meticulously curated to prepare him for a role on the world stage. After graduating from Harvard in 1936, he was sent to the London School of Economics, the LSE. This was a critical choice. The LSE was a bastion of Fabian socialism, an ideology that rejects violent revolution in favor of a gradual, incremental transition towards a managed, collectivist society, guided by an intellectual elite. It was at the LSE, under the tutelage of thinkers like the staunch internationalist Harold Laski, that David Rockefeller's innate belief in a managed global order was given a firm academic and philosophical foundation. He then returned to the United States to complete a PhD in economics at the University of Chicago, the very institution his grandfather's money had built. His 1940 dissertation, Unused Resources and Economic Waste, reveals a mind deeply concerned with order, efficiency, and the large-scale management of economic systems. It was the thinking of a future planner, a man who saw the messy, uncoordinated actions of individuals and nations as a problem to be solved through rational, centralized control. His formal education was completed just as the world descended into the chaos of the Second World War. Enlisting as a private in the U.S. Army, his elite background and skills quickly saw him commissioned and assigned to military intelligence. Serving in North Africa and France, he wasn't on the front lines of combat. He was on the front lines of information and power. He served as an assistant military attaché, building intelligence networks, liaising with French political factions, and writing economic and political reports that were sent back to Washington. This experience was his crucible. The war provided him with a real-world, graduate-level education in how the world truly worked. He learned the value of secrecy, the mechanics of international relations behind the public facade, and most importantly, the art of building a network of contacts, a web of individuals in key positions who could provide information and facilitate action. When the war ended, David Rockefeller was 30 years old. He had the family name, the fortune, the elite education, and the practical experience in global affairs. He was now ready to begin his life's work. In 1946, he joined the staff of the Chase National Bank as an assistant manager in its foreign department. The Chase Bank was already deeply intertwined with Rockefeller interests. His mother's father, Senator Nelson Aldrich, had been a key architect of the Federal Reserve System, and his uncle, Winthrop Aldrich, was the bank's chairman. For David, Chase would become more than a business. It would become his base of operations, his private intelligence agency, and his personal State Department for the next 3.5 decades. He rose through the ranks with a quiet, determined ambition. He was not a charismatic backslapper or a ruthless corporate raider in the mold of his grandfather. His style was understated, intellectual, and deeply strategic. His true talent lay in building relationships. He embarked on a relentless program of global travel, meeting not just with bankers, but with heads of state, finance ministers, intellectuals, and military leaders in every corner of the world. His personal Rolodex became the stuff of legend, said to contain detailed cards on over 150,000 individuals. It was a living map of the global elite. He knew everyone, and everyone knew him. When he traveled, he was received not as a mere banker, but as a visiting potentate, a representative of an empire more permanent than most governments. As he ascended to the pinnacle of power at Chase, eventually becoming chairman and CEO in 1969, he used this network to transform the bank into the world's first truly global financial institution. This was banker diplomacy in action. Under Rockefeller's leadership, Chase went where the U.S. government often could not or would not go, acting as the vanguard of a new, interconnected world financial system. In 1964, at the height of the Cold War, he met with Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev for 2.5 hours in the Kremlin, a move that stunned the diplomatic world. This paved the way for Chase to become a major financier of U.S.-Soviet trade. In 1973, he led a delegation to the People's Republic of China, which was still largely isolated from the West. He met with Premier Zhou Enlai and returned with a historic agreement for Chase to become the first American correspondent bank for the Bank of China since the Communist Revolution. He praised Mao Zedong's social experiment, writing in the New York Times that it had fostered a high morale and community of purpose. Even though this experiment, the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, had led to the deaths of tens of millions. For Rockefeller, the internationalist, the ideological nature of a regime was secondary. Whether a nation was a democracy, a monarchy, or a communist dictatorship was less important than its willingness to integrate into his vision of a global economic system. He maintained close ties with the brutal, repressive regime of the Shah of Iran and later with the military dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet in Chile. His goal was consistent: open every nation on earth to the flow of global capital and influence, knitting them together into a single, interdependent whole. This, then, was the man behind the curtain, a man who inherited a dynastic belief in the power of subtle institutional influence. A man educated in the philosophies of international governance and trained in the shadows of military intelligence. A man who built a private network of power that rivaled any government and used a global bank as his instrument to pry open the world. He was not just a capitalist. He was an ideological warrior. His core belief, the central animating force of his entire life, was that the system of independent nation-states was the fundamental problem of humanity. And he, David Rockefeller, possessed the vision, the network, and the power to begin building its replacement. He was the ultimate internationalist, standing behind the curtain, ready to direct the next act of the human story. A plan of immense ambition, one that seeks to reshape the very foundations of world power, cannot be executed by a single individual, no matter how wealthy or well-connected. An architect needs more than a blueprint, he needs a workforce. A general needs more than a strategy, he needs an army. And a man who dreams of a new world order needs more than a vision. He needs an infrastructure. A living, breathing network of institutions designed to translate private consensus into public policy, to transform quiet conversations into the unshakable course of history. David Rockefeller was, above all else, a builder of institutions. He understood that true, lasting power was not personal but structural. He dedicated his life not just to participating in influential groups, but to creating and dominating them. He forged what researchers and critics have come to call the triumvirate of control, three seemingly independent, yet deeply interconnected organizations that would serve as the pillars of his internationalist agenda. These were not secret societies in the traditional sense of cloaks and daggers. They were far more insidious, operating in the open yet shielded by prestige, respectability, and academic gravitas. They were the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderberg Group, and the Trilateral Commission. Together, they formed a formidable edifice, a shadow government designed to manage the world from behind the curtain. Tonight, we will enter each of these pillars and inspect their architecture of influence. Our first pillar is the oldest and, in many ways, the most foundational to the American establishment, the Council on Foreign Relations, or the CFR. To understand the CFR is to understand the nerve center of American foreign policy for the last century. It was founded in 1921 in the wake of World War I. Its genesis came from a group of American and British scholars and diplomats, known as the Inquiry, who had advised President Woodrow Wilson at the Paris Peace Conference. Their goal was to prevent future wars by fostering a more internationalist approach among the world's leaders. Its stated mission, to this day, is a noble one: to be a nonpartisan resource helping its members and policymakers better understand the world and the foreign policy choices facing the United States. But what if its true purpose was something else entirely? David Rockefeller did not found the CFR, but he came to embody its power. He joined in 1949 and, from 1970 to 1985, served as its chairman of the board, a period when its influence arguably reached its zenith. Under his guidance, the CFR was not merely a think tank. It became the primary gatekeeper for the American foreign policy establishment. Membership is by invitation only. Its roster, past and present, is a staggering who's who of American power. It includes multiple U.S. presidents, from Herbert Hoover to Joe Biden. It includes a vast majority of secretaries of state, defense, and the Treasury for the past 75 years. It is filled with CIA directors, chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Supreme Court justices, major media publishers, prominent university presidents, and the CEOs of the most powerful corporations and Wall Street banks. Critics have called it the American Politburo, or the antechamber of power. They argue it functions as a government in waiting. Through its closed-door study groups and task forces, policy is formulated and debated long before it is ever presented to Congress or the American public. A consensus is reached within the halls of the Pratt House, and then its members, through their powerful positions in government, media, and finance, go out and implement it. It is a classic example of what researchers call the revolving door. Individuals move seamlessly from the CFR to high-level government posts and back again, ensuring a continuity of policy regardless of which political party holds the White House. The Council's journal, Foreign Affairs, is widely considered the most influential periodical in the world for international policy. An article published in Foreign Affairs can set the terms of debate for the entire global community. It was in these pages, in 1947, that diplomat George Kennan, under the pseudonym X, published the X article, which laid out the foundational doctrine of containment that would guide American policy throughout the Cold War. The policy was born inside the CFR ecosystem. For Rockefeller and his fellow internationalists, the CFR was the domestic engine of the New World Order. It was the crucial first step to consolidate control over the foreign policy apparatus of the world's most powerful nation. By ensuring that the key nodes of American power were occupied by individuals who shared a globalist worldview, the foundation was laid. But America was only one piece of the puzzle. The next step was to build a bridge across the Atlantic. This brings us to our second, and by far the most mysterious pillar of the triumvirate, the Bilderberg Group. If the CFR is the public face of the shadow elite, Bilderberg is its secret heart. The very name evokes images of clandestine meetings and kingmakers deciding the fate of the world in smoke-filled rooms. And the reality is not far off. The first Bilderberg meeting was held in May 1954 at the Hotel de Bilderberg in Oosterbeek, Netherlands, hence the name. Its public purpose was to promote Atlanticism, to foster understanding and dialogue between the political and economic elites of Western Europe and North America in the face of the growing threat from the Soviet Union. The initiative was spearheaded by Polish political advisor Josef Riedinger and Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, but from the very beginning, David Rockefeller was a key figure, a lifelong attendee, and a long-serving member of its powerful steering committee, the group that decides who is invited and what is discussed. What sets Bilderberg apart is its absolute, impenetrable secrecy. Each year, roughly 130 of the planet's most influential individuals, heads of state, finance ministers, titans of industry, banking moguls, heads of intelligence agencies, and media barons are invited to meet for 3 days at a 5-star hotel, which is completely locked down by private security and local police. The press is barred. No minutes of the meetings are ever published. No policy statements are issued. Attendees are bound by the Chatham House Rule, a protocol which states that participants are free to use the information they receive, but they cannot reveal the identity or affiliation of the speaker, nor that of any other participant. This creates a cone of silence where the world's most powerful people can speak with a frankness that would be impossible in public, free from all accountability. The official line is that this secrecy allows for a free and open exchange of ideas. But critics ask a simple question. What ideas require such extreme measures to protect them from the public eye? If they are simply discussing global trends, why can't the people they govern know what is being said? Theorists argue that Bilderberg is where the global elite's marching orders are decided. It is a consensus-building machine. It is where policies are vetted and where future leaders are chosen. They point to a suspicious pattern. A rising politician is invited to Bilderberg, and shortly thereafter, they ascend to the highest office in their nation. Bill Clinton attended in 1991, a year before he was elected U.S. President. Tony Blair attended in 1993, 4 years before becoming UK Prime Minister. The list goes on. The implication is that these individuals are presented to the group, vetted for their compliance with the globalist agenda, and then receive the powerful backing of the Bilderberg network in their political careers. Over the years, a few cracks have appeared in the wall of silence. Dennis Healy, a Bilderberg founder and steering committee member for 30 years, admitted in an interview, "To say we were striving for a one-world government is exaggerated, but not wholly unfair. Those of us in Bilderberg felt we couldn't go on forever fighting one another for nothing and killing people and rendering millions homeless. So we felt that a single community throughout the world would be a good thing. Not wholly unfair." A chilling admission from one of its chief architects. Bilderberg was the furnace where the transatlantic consensus was forged, binding the leadership of Europe and America into a single cohesive force, all under the watchful eye of its steering committee, where David Rockefeller was a permanent and guiding light. The CFR had secured the American base, Bilderberg had secured the transatlantic alliance, but Rockefeller's vision was truly global. A final piece was needed to complete the puzzle. This brings us to the third pillar of the triumvirate, the one whose creation was David Rockefeller's own personal project, the Trilateral Commission. If the CFR was the national base and Bilderberg was the regional bridge, the Trilateral Commission was the global capstone. By the early 1970s, Rockefeller felt that the Bilderberg meetings were too focused on the concerns of North America and Western Europe. The world had changed. Japan had emerged as a formidable economic power, and Rockefeller believed it, and the rest of the industrialized Pacific needed to be brought into the fold. The goal was to manage what he called the interdependence between the three great economic centers of the democratic world: North America, Western Europe, and Japan. So, in 1973, David Rockefeller founded the Trilateral Commission. Its first director was a brilliant but obscure Columbia University professor named Zbigniew Brzezinski. Like its sister organizations, the Trilateral Commission is a private, invitation-only group composed of several hundred influential figures. Its stated purpose is to encourage closer cooperation among the core democratic industrialized areas of the world. But its critics saw it as the most blatant instrument yet for the creation of a global superstate managed by international financial and corporate interests. The Commission's own literature spoke of a need for a new international economic order. Brzezinski himself wrote a book called Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technotronic Era, in which he argued that the nation-state as a fundamental unit of man's organized life has ceased to be the principal creative force. International banks and multinational corporations are acting and planning in terms that are far in advance of the political concepts of the nation-state. This was the very philosophy of the New World Order laid bare. The Commission's influence became stunningly apparent in 1976. A little-known one-term governor from Georgia, Jimmy Carter, won the presidential election. Carter was a member of the Trilateral Commission. He had been handpicked and groomed by Brzezinski and Rockefeller. Once in office, his administration was so thoroughly stacked with members of the Commission that it became known as the Trilateral Administration. His vice president, Walter Mondale, was a member. His national security advisor was none other than the Commission's co-founder, Zbigniew Brzezinski. His Secretary of State, Cyrus Vance, was a member. His Secretary of Defense, Harold Brown, was a member. His Secretary of the Treasury, Michael Blumenthal, was a member. In total, nearly one-third of the entire membership of the Trilateral Commission held a post in the Carter administration. It was a takeover of the executive branch of the U.S. government so complete, it was breathtaking. Here, then, is the triumvirate of control fully assembled. 3 organizations created, funded, and guided by David Rockefeller and his secret cabal of internationalists. They are not separate entities. They are an interlocking directorate. Key figures hold membership in 2, or even all 3 organizations. They are funded by the same network of tax-exempt foundations like the Rockefeller, Ford, and Carnegie Foundations. They work in perfect synergy. The CFR develops the policy and grooms the American personnel. Bilderberg forges the transatlantic consensus among the European and American elites. The Trilateral Commission expands this consensus to the industrial powers of Asia, creating a unified global management structure. Together, they form a self-perpetuating ecosystem of power. They publish the journals that define acceptable opinion. They fund the universities that train the next generation of managers. They control the corporations and banks that steer the economy, and they populate the highest levels of national governments. From the outside, they are respectable, prestigious clubs for discussion and debate. But from the inside, critics charge, they are the operational arms of a slow-motion coup d'etat, coup against the sovereignty of all nations, in favor of a new global order with David Rockefeller as its quiet, patient, and undisputed chairman. We have met the architect, David Rockefeller, a man whose life was a masterclass in the quiet accumulation of power. We have toured his workshop, the triumvirate of control, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderberg Group, and the Trilateral Commission of formidable infrastructure for forging elite consensus. Now, we must ask the most crucial question of all. What were they building? What is the final design laid out in their secret blueprint? According to decades of research by those who have dared to look behind the curtain, the objective is as simple as it is audacious: the systematic and gradual dissolution of national sovereignty, culminating in the erection of a single global government. But this would not be a government born from a global democratic movement. The vision, critics charge, is for a technocracy, a planetary management system run by a self-appointed class of experts, bankers, and intellectuals who believe they are uniquely qualified to steer the course of humanity. The plan is not a swift coup, but a slow, multi-generational process of erosion. A blueprint with 3 main, interlocking phases designed to make a world government not just possible, but to make it seem to an unsuspecting populace both necessary and inevitable. The first and most fundamental stage of the blueprint is economic unification. The old adage is true: he who controls the money supply controls the nation. Therefore, to control the world, you must first control the world's economy. This phase proceeds through a calculated, step-by-step strategy of regionalization, presented to the public as a simple matter of free trade and prosperity. The model, the great exhibit A for this strategy, is the European Union. Let us trace its history. It did not begin with a call for a European superstate. It began quietly in 1951 as the European Coal and Steel Community, a simple technical agreement between 6 countries to pool their resources. The sales pitch was practical. It would make war between France and Germany not merely unthinkable, but materially impossible. But this was the Trojan horse. Over the next several decades, through a series of treaties, the Treaty of Rome, the Maastricht Treaty, the Lisbon Treaty, this simple trade bloc methodically evolved. It became the European Economic Community, then simply the European Community, and finally the European Union. With each step, national sovereignty was chipped away. A free trade zone became a customs union. A customs union became a single market. National laws were steadily subordinated to directives from the European Commission in Brussels, an unelected bureaucratic body. National borders were erased under the Schengen Agreement. And finally, the ultimate symbol of national economic sovereignty was surrendered. Their historic national currencies, the franc, the mark, the lira, the pesetor, sacrificed on the altar of a single regional currency. The euro, managed by a European central bank over which no single nation has ultimate control. In the span of a single lifetime, a collection of proud, ancient, and fiercely independent nations was transformed into a political federation, a regional superstate, precisely as the internationalists had planned. The blueprint alleges that this European experiment was always intended to be the model for other regions of the world. The next target was North America. In 1994, the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, came into effect. Again, it was sold to the public as a simple trade deal to lower tariffs between the US, Canada, and Mexico. But critics, pointing to the European model, warned it was the first step towards a North American Union, complete with a common currency, the Amero. While a full political union has not yet materialized, the trend of integration is undeniable. The agreement harmonized regulations, created supranational arbitration panels whose rulings could override national courts, and further intertwine the economies, making separation increasingly difficult. The blueprint's ultimate economic goal is to connect these regional blocs, the EU, the North American bloc, a future Asian bloc, into a single, seamless global marketplace. A world without economic borders, where multinational corporations and banks, loyal to no nation, can operate without restraint. And to manage this global system, the final objective is the creation of a world central bank, an institution that would have ultimate control over the planet's money supply, credit, and debt. It would be the Federal Reserve System, a model the Rockefeller family was instrumental in creating for America, writ large for the entire world. It would be the final checkmate, giving a small, unelected group of bankers the power to create booms and busts on a global scale, to discipline non-compliant nations, and to control the economic destiny of every human being on Earth. Economic unification lays the foundation, but the second phase of the blueprint provides the engine for change: political subversion through the exploitation of crisis. How do you convince free peoples to willingly surrender their national independence and submit to a higher global authority? You don't ask them. You make them beg for it. This strategy is often described by researchers as problem-reaction solution. First, you create or exacerbate a problem, a crisis so vast, so terrifying, that it overwhelms the capacity of any single nation to handle it. Second, you foster the public reaction: fear, panic, and a desperate demand that someone must do something. And third, you present your prepackaged solution, a solution that always involves centralizing power and ceding sovereignty to an international body that you, of course, control. The 20th and 21st centuries have provided a continuous stream of such global crises. Consider economic crises. The Great Depression led to a massive expansion of government power and international financial controls. The 2008 financial meltdown, which began in the US, caused a global contagion, leading to calls for globally coordinated financial regulations managed by bodies like the Bank for International Settlements, the Central Bank for Central Banks, and the Financial Stability Board. Consider environmental crises. The threat of global warming, or climate change, is presented as the ultimate global problem that no nation can solve alone. The proposed solutions? International treaties like the Paris Agreement, which aim to give global bodies the power to dictate the energy policies of sovereign nations, impose carbon taxes, and facilitate a massive transfer of wealth and technology under the banner of climate justice. Consider public health crises. The threat of a global pandemic is another perfect vehicle. An outbreak of a novel virus instantly creates a state of global fear. The solution presented by organizations like the World Health Organization, which receives significant funding from foundations tied to this network, is for a globally coordinated response. This has led to calls for a new international pandemic treaty, which could grant the WHO the power to declare pandemics and dictate lockdowns, vaccine mandates, and other public health measures, overriding the decisions of national governments. The strategy is brilliant in its cynicism. Each crisis, whether real, manufactured, or exaggerated, becomes another justification, another ratchet click, tightening the screws of global governance. It is a process of conditioning the public to look not to their own elected leaders for safety and security, but to unelected international experts and bureaucrats. This strategy is perfectly encapsulated in a quote widely attributed to David Rockefeller himself from a 1991 Bilderberg meeting. "We are on the verge of a global transformation. All we need is the right major crisis and the nations will accept the new world order." While the definitive sourcing of this quote is debated, its sentiment is a chillingly accurate reflection of the strategy in play, and it aligns with his authenticated public statements. As he said to the United Nations in 1994, "This present window of opportunity will not be open for long. Crises create windows of opportunity for radical change." The third and final phase of the blueprint is perhaps the most insidious, because it takes place in the battlefield of the human mind, ideological and informational control. You cannot impose a world government by force alone. You must make the people desire it, or at least accept it as a benign inevitability. To achieve this, you must control the dominant narrative. You must shape the very ideas, values, and information that people consume. This is where the true power of the triumvirate, the CFR, Bilderberg, and the Trilateral Commission comes into its own. Remember who their members are. The owners and directors of the world's most powerful media empires, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the major television networks, Time magazine. The presidents of the most prestigious universities, Harvard, Yale, Columbia. The heads of the great philanthropic foundations, Ford, Carnegie, and of course, Rockefeller, that provide the funding for academic research and social programs. This interlocking network gives the cabal the power to, as one critic put it, manufacture the consent of the governed. It works in several ways. First, through academia and education, they promote the core tenets of globalism. Curriculums are designed to emphasize international cooperation while downplaying the virtues of national sovereignty. Patriotism is subtly reframed as a primitive and dangerous form of nationalism or xenophobia. History is rewritten to portray the nation-state as a source of endless conflict and oppression. Second, through their dominance of the mainstream media, they set the boundaries of acceptable debate. The media's role is not to inform, but to channel the narrative. Issues are framed in a way that always leads to the preferred globalist solution. Experts who are invariably members of these same organizations are presented as the only credible voices, while dissenting opinions are ignored, ridiculed, or labeled as misinformation. Anyone who points out the patterns described in this blueprint, anyone who questions the motives behind the relentless push for global governance, is immediately branded with the dismissive label of conspiracy theorist. This is a powerful tool of psychological warfare. It uses social pressure to silence dissent and to stop critical inquiry before it can even begin. The goal is to create an ideological echo chamber so vast and all-encompassing that the very idea of resisting the New World Order becomes unthinkable. Once again, a controversial but widely cited quote attributed to David Rockefeller from that same 1991 Bilderberg meeting seems to confirm this strategy. He is alleged to have said to the assembled journalists and media titans, "We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subjected to the lights of publicity during those years." Whether he said those exact words or not, the 40 years of discreet silence from the world's press about the true nature of the Bilderberg meeting speaks for itself. The media was not an adversary to be overcome. It was a partner in the plan. So there it is, the threefold blueprint for a new world. A world with one economy, one government, and one way of thinking. Achieved not with armies and invasions, but with free trade agreements, managed crises, and the relentless, pervasive power of propaganda. It is a quiet war, fought in boardrooms and classrooms, a war for the soul of humanity, with the ultimate prize being the end of national independence and the dawn of a centrally controlled global society. For decades, the idea of a secret cabal conspiring to build a world government was the domain of the fringe. It was a whisper in the dark alleys of history, a theory confined to pamphlets and late-night radio shows, easily dismissed by the gatekeepers of mainstream thought as the paranoid fantasy of extremists. To question the motives of men like David Rockefeller was to invite ridicule, to be branded a conspiracy theorist, a label designed to end debate and discredit the inquirer. The warnings were there, issued by congressmen, journalists, and academics who risked their reputations to speak out. But they were just whispers, warnings against a powerful, respected, and seemingly benevolent man. How could one prove such an audacious charge? Often, the most profound truth, the most damning piece of evidence, does not come from the accusers. It comes unexpectedly from the accused himself. It comes in a moment of unguarded pride, a moment of supreme confidence, a moment when the mask slips. For David Rockefeller, that moment came in 2002 with the publication of his own life story. And within its pages, he provided the ultimate warning, a confession that transformed the whispers into a deafening roar. Let us set the stage. Rockefeller is addressing his critics head-on, the very people who had accused him of the things we have been exploring. He does not deny their charges. He does not refute them. He embraces them. He writes, "For more than a century, ideological extremists at either end of the political spectrum have seized upon well-publicized incidents to attack the Rockefeller family for the inordinate influence they claim we wield over American political and economic institutions. Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists, and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure, one world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I am proud of it." Let us deconstruct the weight of these words. This is not a misquote. This is not a controversial statement attributed by an anonymous source. This is David Rockefeller in his own words, in his own autobiography. He uses the very language of his critics. Secret cabal. He does not shy away from it. He acknowledges it as the accusation. He admits to conspiring, a word with a precise legal and historical meaning, implying a secret plan to commit a harmful or unlawful act. He confirms the goal, to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. And then, as if to remove all ambiguity, he clarifies, "One world, if you will," and the stunning, world-altering conclusion, "If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I am proud of it." This is the single most important passage in the entire history of this conspiracy. It is the smoking gun. With this one paragraph, David Rockefeller confirmed the central claims of his critics for over half a century. The plan was real. The cabal was real. The conspiracy was real. The only point of debate he left open was whether this plan was benevolent, as he saw it, or malevolent, as his critics feared. To find the answer to that, we must look beyond his words and examine the real-world consequences of his internationalism. We must look at the company he kept. David Rockefeller's vision of a one-world order was, in his mind, a noble pursuit of peace and stability. But the path to this utopia was paved with deeply disturbing alliances. A common saying among his critics was that he never met a dictator he didn't like. His brand of banker diplomacy was not concerned with quaint notions of human rights or democracy. it was concerned with integration and control. Any leader, no matter how brutal, who was willing to open his country to the global financial system and play ball with the internationalist agenda was a friend of David Rockefeller. Consider his long and intimate relationship with Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran. For decades, the Shah was a key pillar of American policy in the Middle East and a key client of Chase Manhattan Bank. While the Shah modernized parts of his country, he also ruled with an iron fist, using his notoriously brutal secret police, the SAVAK, to torture and execute thousands of political opponents. This did not deter Rockefeller. He saw the Shah as a force for stability. When the Shah was overthrown in the 1979 Iranian Revolution, he was a man without a country. He was ill with cancer and sought entry into the United States for medical treatment. President Jimmy Carter's administration was reluctant, acutely aware of the risk of provoking the new revolutionary regime in Tehran. But David Rockefeller, along with his close associate and fellow Trilateral Commission member, Henry Kissinger, launched an intense, high-level lobbying campaign. They personally pressured President Carter, calling on their deep state connections and arguing that to deny entry to a loyal, longtime ally would send a terrible message to other American-backed leaders around the world. They were successful. In October 1979, Carter relented and allowed the Shah into a New York hospital. The reaction in Iran was immediate and furious. Just days later, a group of militant students stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, taking 52 American diplomats and citizens hostage. The Iran hostage crisis had begun, a 444-day ordeal that would humiliate the United States and cripple the Carter presidency. This catastrophic event was a direct result of the private influence of David Rockefeller, placing his loyalty to a member of his exclusive global club above the national security of his own country. Perhaps even more revealing was Rockefeller's assessment of one of the most murderous regimes in human history, the Communist China of Mao Zedong. In 1973, after his groundbreaking trip to open financial ties with the officially hostile nation, Rockefeller wrote an article for the New York Times to share his impressions. His words are astonishing. He wrote, "The social experiment in China under Chairman Mao's leadership is one of the most important and successful in human history." He went on to praise the sense of national harmony and the transformation of a society of listless and aimless people into one of high morale and community purpose. This successful experiment he so admired was a regime whose policies, the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, had directly caused the deaths of an estimated 45 to 70 million people through starvation, persecution, and execution. It was a level of human destruction that rivals any in history. Yet, David Rockefeller saw not a charnel house, but an efficient, collectivist administration. What he admired was the very thing that made the regime so monstrous: its ability to exert total control over its population, to subordinate the individual completely to the will of the state. It was a terrifying glimpse into the values that underpinned his vision for a new world order: efficiency and collective purpose, even at the cost of human freedom and life itself. This pattern was not limited to Iran and China. Rockefeller's Chase Bank was a key financial backer of the apartheid regime in South Africa for years and supported the brutal military dictatorship of General Augusto Pinochet in Chile after he overthrew the democratically elected Salvador Allende in a violent coup. For David Rockefeller, the internationalist, the ideology of a regime was irrelevant, as long as it was integrated into the global system he was building. The warnings came not just from his political alliances, but from the very nature of his celebrated philanthropy. The Rockefeller Foundations have poured billions into noble causes like medicine and agriculture. But critics argue this philanthropy was often a Trojan horse, a tool to advance a deeper Malthusian agenda of social engineering and control. Nowhere is this clearer than in the family's decades-long obsession with population control. The Rockefeller Foundation, along with the Ford Foundation, was the primary engine behind the global population control movement of the 20th century. They founded and funded organizations like the Population Council. They funded research into contraceptives and sterilization techniques. On the surface, this was presented as empowering women and family planning. But critics point to the movement's dark roots in the eugenics movement of the early 20th century ideology that sought to improve the human race by encouraging the fit to breed and discouraging or preventing the unfit from doing so. The Rockefellers were major funders of eugenics research, including programs at the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Germany that were later used by the Nazis. For these critics, the post-war focus on population control in the developing world was simply eugenics rebranded a neocolonial effort by a wealthy, white Western elite to limit the population growth of poorer, non-white nations, making them easier to manage and control. A similar warning was sounded about the Green Revolution. The Rockefeller Foundation famously funded the agricultural research that created high-yield varieties of wheat and rice, which were credited with saving millions from starvation. A noble cause, no doubt, but critics point to the hidden cost. These new miracle seeds were often sterile hybrids, forcing farmers to buy new seeds every year, rather than saving them from the previous harvest as they had for millennia. Furthermore, these seeds were designed to be dependent on massive inputs of petrochemical fertilizers and pesticides products sold by multinational corporations with which the Rockefellers had deep ties. The result was a new form of servitude. Farmers in countries like India and Mexico went into debt to buy the required seeds and chemicals. Traditional, sustainable farming methods were wiped out, and control over the very foundation of life, the food supply, was transferred from millions of local farmers into the hands of a few powerful multinational corporations. It was another brilliant move in the blueprint. Centralized control over a key pillar of human survival, all under the guise of humanitarian aid. For years, a small chorus of brave individuals tried to sound the alarm. Congressman Larry McDonald of Georgia, a staunch anti-communist and a member of the John Birch Society, was one of the most vocal. In his 1975 book, The Rockefeller File, he laid out the case bluntly. The Rockefellers and their allies have, for at least 50 years, been carefully following a plan to use their economic power to gain political control of first America and then the rest of the world. Do I mean conspiracy? Yes, I do. McDonald was killed in 1983 when the passenger jet he was on, Korean Airlines Flight 007, was shot down by a Soviet fighter. Journalists like Gary Allen, whose 1972 book None Dare Call It Conspiracy sold millions of copies, brought the theory of an elite-driven plot for world government to a mass audience. They were all dismissed, ridiculed as extremists. But their warnings, seen in the light of Rockefeller's own confession, his support for totalitarian regimes, and the strategic nature of his philanthropy, take on a chilling new resonance. They were not imagining things. They saw the blueprint and recognized it for what it was. The whispers and warnings tell a consistent story. A story of a man whose vision of a one-world order was not a democratic dream, but an elitist's blueprint for control. A man who was willing to align with the world's most brutal tyrants to achieve his goals. A man who used the noble cloak of philanthropy to advance an agenda of population control and economic dependency. And a man who, in the end, was so confident in his power and the righteousness of his cause that he proudly confessed his role as a conspirator, daring the world to do something about it. On March 20, 2017, at the age of 101, David Rockefeller, the last of his generation, passed away. The architect was gone. The chairman of the secret cabal, the proud conspirator for a one-world order, had finally laid down his tools. For a brief moment, it might have seemed as though the story had reached its end, that the grand, century-long project to erect a new global structure had died with its most dedicated and powerful proponent. But a shadow is a peculiar thing. It has no substance of its own, yet it is cast by something very real. And the shadow that David Rockefeller cast upon the world was not just that of a man. It was the shadow of an idea, the shadow of a network, the shadow of a plan. And a plan, if designed correctly, is a machine built to run on its own. Tonight, in our final chapter, we step out of the past and into the turbulent present. We ask the ultimate question: what is the legacy of David Rockefeller's secret plan? Did it die with him? Or is his ghost still in the machine? The blueprint he championed now unfolding before our very eyes, faster and more overtly than ever before? The first part of Rockefeller's legacy is the most tangible. The institutions he built and nurtured. The triumvirate of control is not a historical artifact. The Council on Foreign Relations remains the single most influential foreign policy think tank in America, its members continuing to populate the highest levels of the U.S. State Department, the Pentagon, and the White House. The Bilderberg Group continues to hold its annual secret meetings, its invitations still a coveted prize for the rising global elite. The Trilateral Commission continues its work, having expanded its membership to include influential figures from nations like China and India, adapting its strategy to the new centers of global power. The machinery is still in place. The interlocking directorates, the shared consensus, the revolving door between private power and public office all continues to function with quiet, relentless efficiency. But the legacy is more than just these older organizations. The spirit of the plan, its core ideology, has found a new, more public, and arguably more ambitious face for the 21st century. Enter the World Economic Forum, or the WEF. Every year, the small Swiss mountain town of Davos plays host to the world's most powerful people. The guest list is a fusion of Bilderberg and the Trilateral Commission, supercharged for the digital age. Heads of state like the Chancellor of Germany and the President of France, tech oligarchs like Bill Gates and the CEOs of Google and Meta, Wall Street titans from BlackRock and Goldman Sachs, and heads of international bodies from the UN to the IMF. Its founder and executive chairman is a German engineer and economist named Klaus Schwab. Schwab is a figure cut from the same cloth as Rockefeller's protege, Zbigniew Brzezinski. A lifelong academic with deep connections to the global elite, Schwab attended a Harvard seminar funded by the CIA and run by Henry Kissinger, a key Rockefeller ally. He has turned the WEF from a simple management forum into the premier incubator for globalist policy in the world today. And in 2020, in the midst of the global chaos and fear unleashed by the COVID-19 pandemic, Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum seized their window of opportunity. They unveiled a new initiative, the culmination of all their work. They called it the Great Reset. The language of the Great Reset is a direct echo of the Rockefeller blueprint. Schwab and his followers argue that the interconnected crises of the 21st century, the pandemic, climate change, social inequality, have revealed the failure of the old system. They declare that the world needs a fundamental reset of global capitalism, social contracts, and international relations. They promote a new concept called stakeholder capitalism, which sounds benign, but in practice argues that global corporations should not just be responsible to their shareholders, but to a wide array of stakeholders, a group defined, of course, by the WEF and its allies. It is a model that critics argue would fuse corporate power and state power into a single, unaccountable entity, a form of techno-corporate fascism. The WEF's vision for the future, laid out in their own promotional materials, is chilling. One infamous article on their website in 2016 envisioned life in 2030, beginning with the now notorious line, "Welcome to 2030. I own nothing, have no privacy, and life has never been better." It describes a world where all products have become services. You don't own a car. You use a driverless mobility service. You don't own a house. You pay for access to living space. Your every move, every purchase, every interaction is tracked to create a seamless, efficient, and completely monitored society. The very concept of private property, the bedrock of individual freedom, is dissolved. It is the collectivist dream of Rockefeller's beloved Maoist experiment, repackaged with a sleek, digital, corporate-friendly face. This is the legacy in action. The same core ideas, the obsolescence of national sovereignty, the need for centralized global management by an expert elite, the subordination of the individual to the collective are now being openly advocated on the world stage. The secret plan is no longer secret, and the tools to implement this plan are now more powerful than Rockefeller could have ever dreamed. Consider the blueprint's goal of economic unification. The final step was a world central bank. Today, we see the foundation for that being laid with the push for central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. A CBDC is not like Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies. It is the opposite. It is government-issued digital cash, controlled directly by a nation's central bank. This represents a revolution in financial control. Unlike physical cash, which is anonymous, a CBDC would allow the state to monitor every single transaction you ever make. But the power goes far beyond mere surveillance. CBDCs are programmable money. This means the central authority could set rules for how you can spend your own money. They could block you from buying certain products, like too much gasoline if they are pushing a climate agenda, or books they deem to be misinformation. They could set expiry dates on your savings to force you to spend and stimulate the economy. They could be directly integrated with a social credit system, automatically penalizing or rewarding citizens based on their behavior. A CBDC is the ultimate tool of social engineering and control. It is a digital panopticon in your pocket, and it represents the fulfillment of the blueprint's ambition to place the world's entire financial life under the thumb of a central authority. Consider the blueprint's strategy of crisis induction. The COVID-19 pandemic and the climate change agenda have proven to be the most effective windows of opportunity yet. The World Health Organization, once a mere advisory body, is now negotiating a new pandemic treaty that could give it the authority to declare global health emergencies and recommend, or even mandate, policies like lockdowns and vaccine passports, overriding the sovereignty of its member nations. Likewise, the agenda of net zero emissions, driven by the United Nations and the WEF, seeks to fundamentally re-engineer the global energy system, giving international bodies unprecedented power over the economic lifeblood of every nation on Earth, all in the name of solving a global crisis. The pattern is clear: problem, reaction, solution. A solution that always involves less national freedom and more global control. And finally, consider the blueprint's third phase: ideological control. The label of conspiracy theorist has been updated for the digital age. It is now purveyor of misinformation and disinformation. A vast global censorship industrial complex has emerged where big tech companies, in partnership with governments and so-called fact-checking organizations, many funded by the same network of foundations, work to suppress narratives and voices that challenge the official globalist agenda. The goal is the same as it ever was: to control the boundaries of thought, to make dissent impossible, and to create the perception of an overwhelming consensus in favor of their new world order. So we are left with this legacy: a world marching steadily towards the very structure David Rockefeller proudly confessed to conspiring to build. A world where national sovereignty is derided as selfish, where global crises are used to justify the centralization of power, and where technology is being forged into the ultimate instrument of control. This brings us to our final and most personal question. Was David Rockefeller a villain? Or was he a tragic, misguided visionary? Perhaps, in his own mind, he truly believed he was working to save humanity from itself. Perhaps he looked at the wars, poverty, and chaos of the world and concluded, with the cold logic of an elite planner, that humanity was simply too foolish to govern itself, and that a benevolent, expert-led global dictatorship was the only path to peace and order. Or perhaps it was the ultimate expression of dynastic hubris. The belief, born of immense wealth and privilege, that he and his class were simply better, more intelligent, and more entitled to rule than the common man. The belief that their plan, their order, was superior to the messy, unpredictable, but precious freedom of individuals and nations to determine their own destiny. The truth of his personal motives is now buried with him, but the legacy of his plan is alive and well. The blueprint is out of the shadows and is being implemented in the full light of day, sold to us as progress, as safety, as our only future. The story of David Rockefeller is not just a history lesson. It is a warning. It is a challenge to recognize that the great historical forces shaping our lives are not always accidental. It is a call to be vigilant, to question the motives of those who promise us utopia in exchange for our freedom. The final chapters of this story are not yet written. The New World Order is not yet an inevitability. Its ultimate success or failure depends on the choices we make today. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the legacy of David Rockefeller. The shadows of the past are long, and they touch us in ways we rarely comprehend. If this investigation has made you think, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Driftwood Histories for more journeys into the hidden narratives that shape our world. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you won't miss our future explorations. The conversation doesn't end here. What are your thoughts? Do you see the legacy of this plan in the world around you? Share your perspective respectfully in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious and question everything.